This is Melissa Gonzalez. Today is Monday, April 29th, 2013. I am interviewing Mr. Zack Prince for the first time. This interview is taking place at the University of Texas at Arlington Central Library, located in Arlington, Texas. This interview is sponsored by the College of Liberal Arts and is part of the Maverick Veterans Voices Project. Mr. Prince, where are you from originally?
I'm from Fort Worth, not far.
So were you involved in ROTC while in high school?
Yes, I was.
Was that, did your family influence you to participate?
No, very few of my family members had any sort of military service before me. And so this was something I just decided I wanted to do. Actually, in high school, I was at one of the football stadiums, and the UTA Jodies marched. And that sold me not only on the team, but also coming here for a couple of years.
So I was just about to ask, why did you choose to attend Arlington State
I
College?
came mainly for the ROTC program and thought I would go to UT Austin.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I had been accepted when they made it a four-year school. And so I stayed because they told me that if I worked hard, I'd get to be in the first graduating class, and also be the first ones to get one of the first ones to get a commission in a four-year school, at Arlington, that is.
And that was part of the Distinguished Military Graduates program, correct?
Well, that was separate.
Okay.
That was for people who had good grades and had excelled in military science, and I don't know, they probably had some other criteria. But I did get Distinguished Military Graduate, yes. And that allows you to be a regular officer if you choose.
So what was your major?
My major started off in liberal arts, and I got interested in business administration, and so I switched after my freshman year. I graduated with my bachelor's in business administration.
What were your duties while on the Sam Houston Rifle Drill Team?
Well, of course, I started off in the line as a marcher, and then went to squad leader. And then I was a sophomore year, which it was still junior college, I made executive officer. So I got to march at the rear and help keep people in line and everything, not that they needed it. And then my junior and senior year, I was guide on, carried the flag, the little flag that you twirled and everything. So I enjoyed that. That was fun.
What kind of training did that involve?
The guide on?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the previous guy was still there, and he showed me how to twirl this. This was a short staff flag. It had a wood staff and a small flag, but they had cut the staff off. When I first came, they used a long flag, and they were always sticking it in the ground accidentally or bumping somebody with it. So they cut it off where it was about 4 feet or 3.5 feet or something like that. And I actually learned to twirl it, I didn't do it very long.
Were there any professors or instructors that significantly influenced you?
Well, I saw that on the questionnaire, and the people that really impressed me were the military science cadre, the full-time cadre here, and they made a great impression on me. Colonel Kirk Brock was the PMS. He was a colonel at the time that they were overrun in Korea, and he was taken prisoner. And I think he's one of the highest, if not the highest, officers, highest ranked officers to actually be a prisoner of war. And he was crippled because of it. But he he stayed in the service, and he was near retirement at that time, but he was really a great leader. And then Captain Latham, Willard Latham, and of course he went on to be a major general, now retired. And he was our ROTC, he was our Jody sponsor. And so I got a big dose of him for 4 years. And he also taught several of the classes, of course, that I taught. And I considered him to be a real inspiration. And then Sergeant Major Lewis was here. He had been taken back to a sergeant major. He was a major he was an officer. And they did a cutback on officers after the Korean War was over. And so he had to step back or get out. And he didn't want to get out, and so he went back to being a sergeant major. And he took it with great aplomb. I've known some people that could not do that, but he did. And he was a great leader too.
What was your course load like? Were you full or part-time?
I was full-time, very full-time.
And were you living on campus?
Not till my last year. I lived till my last year, and I was a ramp commander or counselor or something of the old Davis Hall, which is now Brazos Hall. Still the same building, I guess. It's still there. Yeah.
Did you work while you were in college?
I worked every summer for a construction company, and that helped me stay in shape for the drill team. They worked us hard on the drill team. Yeah.
What was a day in the life like on the drill team?
Well, we practiced 3 or 4 times a week,
Okay.
except when there was nothing coming up. But most of the time there was some sort of performance on the horizon. And so we practiced 3 or 4 times a week. And then every day, every weekday, if one was within the next few weeks. Because at that time, they claimed they had never lost a competition. So anything that we were going to be judged on, we were always ready for it. So it was an hour and a half drill every day. And it was right after, it was long about 4 o'clock or something like this.
So
But if you were on the drill team, you had to make those unless you were ill, you know.
And did you do a lot of traveling with the drill team?
Mm-hmm. Sure did.
Where did y'all go and what kind of competitions did you participate in?
Well, I missed the Junior Rose Bowl trip to California the first time in 57, or was it? Yeah, 57. Because I had dropped off because of my course load. And I joined back up in spring and never did miss another semester. So I really regretted that. But we went to all over Texas. And I think we went to Shreveport one time. Also, they had gone the year before I came out here to the inaugural parade, which I thought was great, in Washington, I think. I believe that was. But we went to Austin and San Antonio parade and down to Del Rio. They had tremendous drill team competitions back in those days. And they would have high schools competition, and they would have a college or university competition.
So in addition to ROTC, what other campus activities did you engage in?
Well, I was a student government officer my sophomore year, and I think I was elected a favorite, and that's about it. The military science, if you really got involved, it kept you busy. Plus, I was taking 15 to 18 hours a semester, and because I wanted to get out in 4 years. When I changed my major, I was behind.
Mm. So you were said that as a distinguished military graduate, you received the benefit of a regular commission.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do after graduating?
Well, I was. They didn't have a place in my branch. I was AG. I wanted to be infantry, but they wouldn't take me at that time because of my eyesight. And in a combat branch, now they would take reserve officers, but they wouldn't take regular officers that were going to make a career out of it. And so I signed up for the Adjutant General Corps, and there was no positions available when I graduated. So they said if I'd wait 6 months, they'd put me on active duty. So I started graduate school at TCU and started working, and working part-time at Montgomery Ward. Well, 6 months came and went, and they didn't call me, so I called the command, and they said, "Oh, we're sorry, Lieutenant, but we don't have a place for you yet, but we'll get you on active duty." Well, they got me on 1 year to the day that I graduated afterward. So I went on active duty graduated at the end of May in 1961. I went on active duty at the end of May, well, actually June 1st of 1962.
So in that year that you had before you went into active duty, did you do anything to keep in shape or
Yeah.
to keep in?
Yeah, I was actually attached to a reserve unit, but it was an inactive reserve. They didn't meet. But I was on pay purpose. For pay purposes, I was attached to the Army, and I'll tell you that story in a little bit. But anyway, I stayed in shape because I thought when I get on active duty, I'm going to be faced with all these guys that are coming right out of college, and they're going to be, a lot of them are in sports, and a lot of them are going to be really in good shape if they've been on drill teams or whatever. So I continued to work out.
So what was the transition like from going to TCU and working at Montgomery Ward and then going straight into active duty? What was that transition like?
Montgomery Ward kept me real busy, and of course the graduate courses in business kept me busy. So I was used to being very busy full time. And actually, it was sort of a relief because I was attached to the Adjutant General Corps and went to Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana for my training. They have the Adjutant General Corps and the Finance Corps there. And it's a very pleasant post. And my wife and I got on post, which was just amazing. Second lieutenant coming on active duty, and I got on post. And it was a two-story bed apartment. And we couldn't believe it, but we got there 2 days early, and they put us in the BOQ quarters. And then they said, "Would you like to be on post?" And my jaw dropped, and I said, "Do you have me mixed up with a higher-ranking officer or somebody else?" Because I've been told there was no chance. They said, "No, we have a vacancy, and you're the first one here for your class, and you can have it." I said, yeah, you know. And they put us on, and that was super because everybody else was paying, living in rooming houses. They had those kind of things back then, boarding houses. Or they were living in motels, cheap motels, where you could sign up for a week, you know, $35 or something. And they were still going broke. And so it was great, you know.
So you mentioned Indianapolis. Is there anywhere else you went for military training after?
No, that was the only training I had until my last year on active duty, and then they sent me to Fort McClellan, Alabama for a combat training course for staff officers. And that was a joke. That was so funny because most of these guys that were there, people had just come on duty and they never had any military training, but they had been direct commissioned or something. And so not only had I been on duty for a year and a half, but I had had a lot of training before that, infantry training. And so, yeah, it was funny, you know, watching them run around and not know what to do.
So do you recall those first days? Was there anything memorable that happened in that first time getting used to that?
The school was pretty laid back. We went to class 8 hours a day and sat there. It was so tiring, boring. But, you know, I did fine and went to El Paso. And they sent most of my class to Germany, and I wanted to go, but my wife was 6 months pregnant. And so they would, I guess she was 5 months. But anyway, they wouldn't send us. And so they said, where would you like to go? And I said, well, I don't know. I haven't been to any of the posts. And they said, how about Fort Bliss, El Paso? And I said, good grief, sending me back to Texas? I've lived in Texas all my life. They said, well, they have an opening there in the Adjutant General Corps, and they need you. And I said, oh, okay. So anyway, I spent then I guess it was 21 months there at Fort Bliss, and it was fun.
Describe your role of the U.S. Army Defense Command in the Adjutant General section. What does that involve?
Well, the Adjutant General Corps is the administrative branch of the Army. They handle all of the paperwork for everything, I guess, except maybe court-martials. And you serve, there's all kinds of different sections. I served in special orders, and that's where you cut orders for officers that are going to special duty post, and they have to be perfect. And I was in charge of that for a while. I was in charge of the MOS testing service, which is military occupational specialty, and that's where you test everyone in their field, and they have to make a certain grade and to get pro pay and all of this. And then I was in charge of records, which I got a full blast when I came here to UTA, but actually they had a good record system there. I was in charge of the post office, which I knew nothing, absolutely nothing about, but I had a sergeant that kept me out of trouble. And my favorite thing of all things was the Army Emergency Relief. They put 2 officers at every post in charge of Army Emergency Relief, and that's where if a soldier has an emergency or a problem and he needs to go or he has to send money home, he can go to this group and they'll interview him and get home reports and find out, and then they'll give him the money that he has to have up to a certain limit. And that was so different because you never knew from day to day what you were going to run into. The company commanders would call and say, I'm sending someone to you, and he really needs this money. And so we would interview them, and there were just 2 lieutenants that were doing it. There was the first lieutenant and myself, and we were in the same building. And sometimes we'd both hear a case if it was kind of iffy. But that was the best duty, I thought, because I felt like I was really helping some people that needed it and had no funds whatsoever. No funds whatsoever.
What other assignments did you have?
Well, when you're attached to a headquarters of a post, you always get officer of the day sooner or later, and about every 4 months got officer of the day. And that was challenging because after 5 o'clock, he and his sergeant that was on duty answered the telephone for the headquarters, not the individual units, but the headquarters. And so anything that happened to a soldier off post came through the officer of the day. And one guy that had been there a good while, he said, now when you draw officer of the day, just pray that you don't have anybody killed that belongs to this post. And the second time I drew it, we had a guy that was in an accident on the way up to White Sands Missile Base, a car accident. And he was near death. And they brought him back to El Paso instead of taking him to White Sands. And I wish they had, but they brought him back, and but he made it. But the sergeant and I were just holding holding ourselves together, hoping he didn't pass away, because that requires a full week of funeral duty. The officer of the day is the one that continues on with the family and all that, and I didn't want to experience that one.
So, did you see any combat at all?
No, I did not.
Okay.
And it was pretty much peacetime.
And were you deployed, or did you get to go to Germany or go overseas?
I never got out of El Paso, Texas.
Oh, no.
I got to Juarez. We fought the Battle of Juarez. But,
Oh, yes. So what are some of your memorable experiences?
well, most of it was pretty routine. One thing that was funny was the officer, we were in the same office. We had a pretty good sized office, and our desks faced each other. We were at one end and came through the middle door. He was a first lieutenant, and I was a second lieutenant for part of it. And he was a half-blood, three-quarter blood Navajo Indian. And his name was Prince E. Pearson. And he went by Elvin. But in the service, they required him to go by Prince, because that was his first name. Well, my name was Ronald Z. Prince, and I went by Zack, but I had to go by Ronald Z. Prince. So everybody would come in, and they'd say, I want to see Prince. And we'd say, we got the biggest kick out of saying, well, which Lieutenant Prince do you want to see? You know, and well, you mean there's more than one? And so we'd introduce ourselves, you know, we got a big joke out of that. But the most memorable thing, and this is sad, But it was with Army Emergency Relief. Most of them were dire emergencies. But we had one that was so crazy, and I've never forgotten it. A company commander called me and said, I have a dependent wife here. She's been here for a month, and she's driving her husband crazy. She's from Tennessee. She has a 5-year-old baby. And she's living in a little apartment off campus, and she doesn't have any money. And I said, well, how's she existing? And he'd already told me that she gets no money from home. And she's driving her husband crazy because he's in the barracks. But he knows what she's doing. I said, what is she doing? He said, she's earning a living at night selling herself. I said, really? And he said, yeah, she takes men back to her apartment and earns money to get by on. He said, you've got to get her out of here. You've got to get her back home, or it's going to ruin this boy's career. He's going to go AWOL. He's just crazy about it. And so I said, okay, send her in. And he said, now don't give her any money because she's crazy. And so she came in, and she was prettiest thing you could imagine. And she has this five-month-old baby in her arm, little boy. And she was blonde-headed, and the boy was blonde-headed. And the lieutenant and I looked at each other and said, man, you know, we got to get her back home. So we told her when to meet us. We said, now you meet us at the railroad station in downtown El Paso. Here's $20. You get food and everything to take with you on the train, and you meet us at the train at a certain time in the evening. And we knew when the train was coming in. We'd already prepared it. And we said, we'll give you your tickets then. She said, I want my tickets now. She said, no, we can't give you your tickets now. We've got to meet you there. We've got to put you on the train. So the other lieutenant and I, Prince E. Pearson, and I dressed up in our business suits because it was after working hours. So we show up and the time came and went. And the train was ready to leave. And there was actually smoke blowing out of the stuff, and we were just scared to death that she's going to miss this thing. Well, she came in about 15 minutes late, running into the train station and out on the ramp. And so, baby in arms, and her bags and everything. So we told her, get on, they're ready to leave. They've already made the last call. So we put her on and saw where she's seated. And we told her, you go right in here and you sit down and you stay there till the train leaves. So she did. She was sitting right there with the window, and she could see us and we could see her. Well, in comes a couple of guys in suits with a cab driver. And they were El Paso detectives. And the cab drivers was saying, that woman has been using my cab all day. So anyway, we said, well, she's on the train. There she's sitting right there. And the train was puffing and puffing, but it wasn't leaving yet. And the officer said, well, you got to get her off, and she's got to pay. And said, we've been given strict orders to send her back to Tennessee, and we got her on the train. We're going to send her. Said, well, we don't know who you are. So I said, well, here's my ID card. He said, well, why aren't you in uniform? I said, well, we're off duty officially. He said, well, I don't know who you are, both of you. So anyway, we went, and so Prince said, the other Prince said, call the officer of the day and let him verify who we are, because we had signed out through him. And so we did, and they talked to him, and they said, okay, but who's going to pay this cabbie? So Prince and I paid the cabbie because we knew we could get it back. And we even gave him a tip because we knew we could get it back. And he was happy. He was ready to press charges and have her thrown in jail. And so anyway, we're standing there and we're just sweating blood. And the train starts off, and she starts waving to us and holding the baby up at the window. And so we're like four nuts. We're standing there waving by like we're family. And I've thought about that so many times. We're grinning and she's grinning. We're waving by this woman going back to Tennessee. And I have thought about that ever since.
Oh my goodness.
I think that's the first time I've ever told it to anybody but my family.
So your wife And Charlotte traveled with you wherever you went?
Well, we didn't go. Yes, the boy wasn't born at the time.
Okay.
But we went to training, and then we got to El Paso before the boy was born. He was born at the military hospital there in El Paso, and then that's as far as we went. Except we made a couple of quick trips back to Fort Worth, you know.
Did you form any close relationships with people?
I did with a couple of officers, but except for Prince Pearson, I never kept up with anyone. I kept up with him for about 10 years.
Okay.
He went back to Arizona and got into business there. And then I kept up with one captain that was in charge of my section, the section I was running. And kept up with him for about 20 years in all.
So you were later promoted to captain in the U.S. Army Reserves. What did that entail?
Well, that was when I was in the reserves. I was in a military intelligence unit in Dallas, and it was the only paid slot, so it was not part of the AG Corps, but they took me in there, and I got to be an instructor and all, and that was fun. And we'd go we go 2 nights a month, and then 1 weekend a month, and do training.
So as an instructor, what were you teaching?
Teaching military intelligence.
Okay. Is that
Which I
something-
learned during the week before I taught it. you know.
Oh my goodness. So are you able to elaborate on that more or no?
Yeah, it was all types of whatever the military intelligence do. Actually, it's not like secret work. What they do is they check people, anybody that they think might be trying to pass information off post and all of that. But they also check the mail of anyone that's a little bit suspicious, or if they're working in a classified position. And the unit I was actually attached to was a military postal unit that and people would be assigned to military postal units, and they would check mail and packages and everything if these people were working in a classified unit.
So tell me about the transition from military to civilian life. When did you start working at UTA?
I got off active duty on May 31st, 1964. I signed out at midnight. My wife and I were sitting in the car outside the headquarters, and when the watch said midnight, I went in and signed out, said goodbye to the guy sitting there, and we drove back to Fort Worth that night, all night and part of the next day, because we didn't have the interstate. It took about 12, 13 hours. And when I saw Fort Worth out there in this side of Weatherford, you know, you can see downtown Fort Worth, its buildings. And I think that was one of the happiest moments. Not that I didn't enjoy the military duty, I did, but I think that was one of the happiest moments. And the next Monday, I had my job here at UTA, and I came to work here as assistant registrar. So I didn't miss but a weekend.
Was there a difference in how you lived on the base and how you lived once you start working at UTA? Did you have to transition at all?
Yeah, but it wasn't drastic because I had had jobs in civilian life before. And this was during peacetime. And we, of course, we wore a uniform every day. And it had to be fit for inspection because you had enlisted men under you, so you had to do an example for that. And you had certain rules, and we lived actually got a house on post, and so you had to make sure your lawn was well kept, and they'd come by and inspect those things. And there were certain rules and a whole lot of paperwork for everyone. But other than that, because we were not in wartime and not in a combat zone, it wasn't strenuous, you know.
So did you go back to college?
I did. I went back to TCU, worked on my master's in business for a couple of semesters while I was working here, and decided I really wasn't interested. I knew then I was going to stay with UTA if I could, but I needed a master's, so I couldn't figure out what I wanted, and I kept asking people, what kind of degree do I need? They said, doesn't matter, you need a master's. And so finally I decided to get one in history. And I did it here at UTA, and 10 years later, 1971, I finished my master's in MA in history here. I never used it, except I did keep up with it. But I never used it until I got to DBU, and they asked me to be an adjunct. It's because I need someone that would teach in the afternoons, and you had to have a master's in a field that you were going to teach. And so I learned to teach history real quick.
Was your postgraduate work supported by the GI Bill?
Yes.
So how did the military experience influence your career?
It was the most defining thing for me. I was a very shy young man, and I started a lot of things as a teenager. Several different music instruments, several different sports, all kinds of activities, and never got good at anything. I always said, too much trouble. And my dad was on my case about that because he was a hard worker. And I never could get really interested in spending a lot of time on anything, even sports. And but when I hooked into the military science, it changed it all because I was determined to succeed, and I knew I needed to succeed. Also, I knew it needed to do better in college than I had done in high school on my grades. And the more I worked in the military science department, the more confidence I got in myself. And I started losing shyness. And I started feeling like, well, I can do that. And these other guys were excelling. They were learning to drill. They were learning to shoot the weapons, fire the weapons. And I can do that. I just have to pay attention and do it and not quit. And it changed my whole direction. And then the drill team had a great deal to do with that because, as I said earlier, we drilled constantly on a regular basis. And we were good. And I was finally a member of a winning unit. And that made the difference. That turned me around. Also, what I've told a lot of people is that I don't know of any place else except the service as a young officer that you can have as much responsibility at 22 and 23 years of age as you do, especially in combat, or not even in combat necessarily, but in a combat unit. When you're a platoon leader, for instance, and that's usually the job that you get. You're a platoon leader and you have soldiers under you at all times, not just when you're in the office. And you're their dad. They may be older than you. In fact, the sergeants usually are. But you're the one that they have to come to, and you better be ready. But the same thing in the offices. We would have soldiers that were working for us come in and say, you know, I need to go home and I don't have any money. And of course, we had charge of our emergency relief, but you have that sort of thing, and you have to decide, can we help this guy, you know? And you have to decide when to say no and when to say yes. But when I got out of the service, I felt like I could handle any type of management job that they put me in, as long as I was willing to learn whatever business it was. And it made me learn leadership.
So tell me a little bit more about your professional activities and your professional involvement.
Well, I really enjoyed the admissions work, and that's where I started off. Even though I was assistant registrar, I was put in charge. I was in charge directly of the admissions, and then we had a registrar and director of admissions over us. And so I worked in admissions for the first 7 years, and I made then they made me associate director of admissions. They just promoted me in place, and continued to do that. So I had a staff under me, and we admitted everybody to the university. At that time, we didn't have. We were even admitting graduate students at first, and then when later they took over the graduate part of it. Then I became registrar and director of admissions in 1970, and from then on I had both sections, both of these large sections, plus the registration. And it was a full-time extra job, just like it is today. And you know, y'all work here, you know how busy people are. And of course on a lot of committees along with that and everything. And it was really a good career. I stayed here 38 years.
When did you retire?
2002.
So what is your role as a member of the Corps of Cadets Advisory Committee?
We are called on just to try to raise money sometimes, to think up things to get the cadets so that we can know them and involve the alumni cadets, the ones that have graduated from here or at least gone through ROTC, all kinds of things like that. And then we have several meetings a year. The big thing now is, for years, has been the Hall of Honor, Military Science Hall of Honor. And we help plan that with the cadre here.
Would you like to see the Jodies return?
Oh yeah. But I don't know if it ever will, because the Army doesn't do that kind of marching anymore. And those were show units. Now, they still have the show units, but they're usually smaller units than what the Jodies are. But someone asked me, why don't they have drill teams anymore that march for in competitions? I said, well, because the Army doesn't use them anymore for anything.
So there have been many changes to the campus since it was Arlington State College, and you've seen many of them while you've been working here. How do you feel about the changes, and what other changes on campus would you like to see happen?
Well, I've been very impressed in the last 10 years, 11 years now, since I retired from here. And I just think it's amazing what Dr. Witt and Dr. Spagnola and now the new man, I can't remember his name, but I'm sure that he's going to continue this. The building has just been phenomenal. And one thing I really like is the fact that they have raised up housing units, because this was our biggest problem. We could only house about 10% all the time that I was here until the last 5 or 6 years. We could only house about 10% of our people in campus housing. And now I don't know what percentage.
I don't remember.
But it's higher. And I think that has been great. Now the other thing I would like to see UT Arlington receive, and I know it's a struggle, and we struggled with it for 20 years while I was here, and that's to get to be a Tier 1 university, a research Tier 1 university. And I think there's only 4 or 5 in the state, is that right? But I would like to see us crack that nut, and I'd like to see us get that, because my understanding is it will make a fantastic difference in the amount of grants and loans, fellowships that you receive, and the number of people that are professors that are have specialty fields that would come here to teach, and not only teach but do research. That's the main thing. And it would draw lots of research money. And so I would like to see that happen.
What do you think it would take for the university to reach Tier 1?
I don't know. You've got to excel, and your administration has to show that it can raise the money on its own before. My understanding is we have a very, very high-ranked faculty now, and I think it's just, in my personal opinion, it's reticent. It's the Texas A&Ms and the UTs, the UT Austins that do not want to get too many of those Tier 1 campuses in the state. But with our growth and all now, it seems to me that they can't withhold it forever. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see us get it before UNT gets it.
Would you like to see football make a comeback?
I'm sorry?
Would you like to see football make a comeback here?
Yeah, I really would. You know, I had season tickets over there, and the new stadium was only in operation 5 years before they discontinued it, and I loved it. We enjoyed it so much. But there is so much competition in this area because of professional sports. And everybody's heart, everybody that has a kids, their heart is with the high schools. And a regional university, and UTA will always be a regional university, no matter what standing it gets. Of course, it's not regional in the sense that we have so many international students. I think it's about 20% now. But I don't know that we could ever draw the crowd to pay for it. And I know that Dr. Netterman had to discontinue it because it was costing more money than the whole rest of the athletic program put together.
Mm-hmm. So what advice would you give current cadets at UTA?
Let me tell you one thing about the football stadium, if you don't mind. They appointed me to a committee, actually as a task force, and they said, you're going to make a decision, your task force is going to make a decision. I wasn't the chairman. They were going, your task force is going to make a decision to build a football stadium or a basketball arena. And we decided to build a football stadium. And now, 30 years later, is it? Yes, 30 years later, have this beautiful basketball arena. And I just say, why in the world were we so short-sighted then? Of course, we had no idea. We had no idea that the UT system was going to discontinue football. We would have gone that way, of course. But they were playing on the Texas stage then. And people were always joking about, well, which person in the audience caught the basketball this time? You know, because there was nothing up there. Well, they finally got where they raised a screen, a net. But I don't know what in the world. But I will say to my credit, I voted for the basketball arena on the committee. Anyway, what was your other question?
What advice would you give current cadets at UTA?
Well, I know that military training now is much more difficult. And I would tell them to get in shape as quick as you can and put your heart into it. And the Army is a wonderful career. I've wondered several times if I shouldn't have kept that RA commission. And several of my friends stayed in for careers and did quite well. And it's a wonderful career, but you do have to be ready to serve in combat zones. And but I would tell them that if nothing else, even if you do what I did, it provides a person an opportunity for leadership and management that you won't get for another 5 years if you stayed in the civilian world.
Is there anything you would like to contribute to the interview that I didn't address?
No, I thought you had some really good questions. I enjoyed them.
Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Prince, for participating in our project. You've been very informative and very helpful. And I just want to thank you again for your service and for your contribution to the Maverick Veterans Voices Project.
Okay, thank you. I
Thank you.
enjoyed it.